All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our free professional development session through College Essay Guide titled College Admission Fundamentals. For those of you who are just joining or tuning into the recording, my name is Tom Campbell. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm one of your co-hosts today for our session. We have an introduction slide in just a few minutes, but I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague Hannah as well to say hello.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Lim, and I'm College Essay Guide's Director of Workshops. I'm going to do a longer intro later, but I'm so happy to be here with you.
Awesome. Great. So I am just going ahead. It's funny. The poll is kind of like in the middle of my screen. Okay, now I'm closing out of it. There we go. So for today's session, we did want to just kind of ask in the chat and just to get a sense for kind of what's on your mind when it comes to supporting your students with the college admission process. So what is one question about college admission that you would like to see answered today in this session? And, you know, we have 45 minutes together, so we cannot promise to get to all of them, but we're going to try as much as possible to meet your needs and answer the things that are going to benefit the group at large as much as possible. And emerging themes that come up in your responses, we'll try to hit as many as we can. And then also, if you want to alternatively answer the second option, which is what is one myth about college admissions that students often bring up that you work with, we'd love to kind of see if we can weave in a little myth debunking. Myth busting is definitely a big part of what I like to do in the profession and with my role. So yeah, it would be great to hear about that in the chat. So yeah, feel free to put your answers to this in the chat. And just so you know, going forward, we will be collecting any of the questions that you have during the session. Please feel free to put those in the chat. Jasmine, who is on the operations side, she's the anonymous college essay guy box that is lurking in the background. So you've been revealed. You've been publicly made known. She'll be collecting those questions, and then depending on how much time we have at the end of the session, we do want to end on time for you today, knowing that many of you are in school right now. You have other commitments, so we want to honor your time. But we also do want to try to answer as many questions as possible. So feel free to, anytime something's coming up that we're talking about that you're like, I don't know what you're saying, please feel free to put that in the Zoom chat. Great. Hannah, any themes in the chat that are coming up that you're seeing with
Yeah,
things that want to get out?
I will gladly say we are going to answer some of these already. And as far as, yeah, we are going to answer a lot of these. As far as where is the college essay guy, he's not here today. So you're not going to hear from Ethan, but we were slotted to be the speakers for today. So I don't think there should be any surprises there, but I promise you, this is going to be really, really beneficial. And if there are any questions, Jasmine is taking those questions down to make sure that we do answer them if they do not get answered during the session that we do. So yeah, let's take it away. Go ahead and do your intro, Tom.
Thanks. So just a little bit about me, and the reason why I'm here today is my background comes predominantly from college admissions and college counseling. So after I spent a year of volunteer service working with children and families, mostly young kids, through the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, I started my admissions career at my alma mater, which is College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts, where I worked for 2 years in the admissions office there. And then I was an admissions officer at Pomona College in Southern California for about 4 admissions cycles. So roughly 6 years on the admissions side. And then I also worked as a college counselor at an independent school called Lakeside School in Seattle, Washington, where I was able to see what it was like on the other side of the desk and realize kind of how the sometimes polished, put together versions of teenagers that we see in college applications are not always the reality, and how it can be messy, and there's emotions, and there's a lot of confusion and ambiguity around the college admission process. So it was really beneficial to be able to take the knowledge that I've learned from that other side behind the admissions committee curtain and door, which we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today, and be able to benefit students and families that I work with that knowledge. And now having the platform like College Essay Guide to reach hundreds of different counselors and educators is really fulfilling to me personally. So I'm really glad to be here.
Awesome. My name is Hannah Lim, and I have a little bit of a unique background as well, where I started off with my goal to teach back in my old high school, teaching English. And with the first recession and everything, things kind of changed for me. And so basically, I started getting some college counseling background, working for an educational test prep company overseas. So I worked with a lot of international students, and they came back and did a lot of work out this way, but also worked with so many students trying to really get into all these colleges that we're helping them get into now. But then I ended up getting that job I wanted, teaching back at my old high school. So I was a public school English teacher there who actually had this information while at the same time having like a side hustle of being one of Ethan's first college essay guy coaches. And so I kind of have a different spectrum of I guess perspectives as a classroom teacher, also as an Avid teacher and coordinator, and I'm getting some love for Avid over there too. So yeah, it's just I've gotten the opportunity to work with public school students, international school students, but also FGLI students as well. And so actually this presentation was originally created so that we could help teachers get some of these fundamental background information to better help their students coach through their college applications. And so, yeah, we're going to go over the agenda and yeah, hopefully that'll be clear.
Right. So the first section that we're going to touch on is something that I'm going to take the reins on, which is what our college is looking for. You know, having worked in admissions at 2 different colleges and having worked with colleagues through a lot of different professional programs. I have been a faculty member at College Horizons for the past couple of years. So it's shout out to College Horizons. It's an awesome program for Native and Indigenous students to be able to get support with the college admission process. And it's hosted by a lot of amazing college admission professionals across lots of different colleges and universities. So doing programs like that, it was able to help me see just the spectrum that exists in the US college and admissions landscape, particularly around selective colleges. So a lot of kind of the information and insights that we're going to be sharing today are focusing a little more on those selective colleges where the essay does have more weight in the process compared to schools that are less selective, you know, the schools that admit more than half their applicants, where we have a slide that kind of touches on this, but essay is one component, but not, you know, and nothing is the end all be all when it comes to college admissions. And people always think that there's like a silver bullet or nail in the coffin, and that definitely really isn't the case. We will, you know, talk about how much do college essays actually matter and how it varies depending on the school that or the college and university and their varying priorities. You're going to hear the phrase "it depends" a lot, which if you're a college counselor, you know that you probably say that on a day-to-day basis to the students and families you work with. So you know, you're among friends. And then one thing that we wanted to show you as well is we want to kind of take you behind the scenes and behind the curtain of how a selective college moves through an admission file and what happens when a student hits submit, because oftentimes there's a lot of ambiguity around how colleges actually make these decisions. So that exercise has been one that like we've done we offer actually a applying to highly selective colleges course through College Essay Guy. We just completed that this past month. And that was based on the feedback, one of the most, I guess, enlightening or kind of biggest takeaways that the participants took from that course. So we wanted to make sure to share that with you all today in this free PD. And then we're also going to touch on kind of what are the difference between English essays and college essays and how some of the information and insights that we're going to share with you can apply and be implemented with the students that you're working with. And then depending on how much time, we'll try to answer as many questions as possible too. So with that, we're going to dive right in. All right, so what are colleges looking for? Of course, if you work with students and families, many of them might say things like, getting into college is impossible, and it's never gonna happen for me. And what's happening in this landscape? Because so much of the media conversation, right, these headlines that you're seeing here on the screen are really kind of fueling the flames when it comes to the hysteria around college admission, right? Like, you know, it's so random, it's a crapshoot, you know, I don't know what these schools are looking for. I don't know how much more I have to do, how much more I have to add, you know, to my narrative to be compelling to these places. And, you know, one of the things that we're really big on talking about at College Essay Guy is that it's not necessarily about more. It's not about adding more or going wide. It's about going deep. And that's something that we're going to try to really hopefully instill some advice that you can share with families around the power that can have in this process. But it's understandable, right? People are going to kind of see these headlines and it makes sense because they are what we are exposed to. And we live in a culture of scarcity, right? So the, you know, headlines and schools that are getting the most attention are these highly selective schools or what we call highly rejected schools, you know, the Harvards, the Ivy League schools, MIT, Princeton, right? Where they are so highly coveted and they hold so much weight and kind of, play such a heavy role in our national consciousness in the United States. that it's really important to kind of, I think, take a step back and zoom out with students and families and kind of present some information and data around the reality of what it means to apply to college and how college and college and higher education in the United States is an accessible path that students can take. It may not be always the places that they envision for themselves, especially if they are like, hey, it's Harvard or bust. And I know many of us probably have worked with students and families that have that mentality. But it's really important to kind of zoom out and say, let folks know that over 75% of colleges that use the Common Application have acceptance rates that are over 50%, right? So it's kind of another way that I like to phrase this is especially this middle category here, right? 0.5% of US high school graduates are attending these most highly selective colleges, the Ivy League schools, MIT, Stanford, UChicago, Caltech. So the hysteria that you see in the headlines is what I call a crisis of the 99 or a crisis of the 0.5%, right? And if you are a student and family in the 99.5% of people, like you're going to be all right. Life is going to work out for you if you kind of know your goals, if you kind of go into these colleges and universities with intentions of making connections with a faculty mentor, and if you utilize the resources and opportunities that are available to you. So many of this is probably like, I'm preaching to the choir, right? And I'm kind of saying what many of us already know, but I do think it's helpful to kind of make sure to, when working with students and families, try to dial down the hysteria that I'm never going to get into college. And then this is just something that's going to be completely unattainable for me because it just really, truly isn't the reality, right? And as we said before, right, something that's really big about college admission that is important to communicate with students and families when they ask you, how are colleges, and they're going to use that term, how are they going to view X, right? And it's always important to qualify and clarify, which I'm going to do many times today, that it very much depends on the individual institution and their varying mission statements, the populations that they are committed to serving, and the needs that they kind of commit to and just the different pain points, right? Colleges are businesses, and that's also something that we're really big about talking about at College Essay Guy is that, yes, they are amazing, transformative places where people can find themselves, they can find how to use their skills, qualities, values, and interests to impact the world in a larger and greater sense beyond themselves. And that definitely happens for so many students who attend college or university. But it's also important to factor in that these schools are also places that have the US is a capitalist economy, right? Colleges need to have certain amount of funding to be able to operate and stay open, especially as we start to enter the birth dearth. So in the next 10 years, it's projected that the US college going age population, so high school seniors graduating and being able to attend college, is going to decline by 15% across the US. Different regions, you're going to see different surges. So, places like Texas, for example, there are more high school students who are going to be applying to college. But overall, there is going to be a decline. Statisticians predict about 15% across the board. So colleges and universities, especially the ones that don't have the name recognition or the headlines, are going to be investing a lot in being able to make sure that they stay open. Students are going to become a valued commodity in the next few years. So, but of course, that's all colleges more broadly, but people very much narrowly focus on these selective schools, which is why it's important, I think, to understand the role or the distinction between kind of like, we thought this slide would be helpful in kind of just sharing like what mostly all colleges and universities are going to be factoring in some capacity, some of these factors that you see on the left of the screen. And then on the right, this is really going to be where it gets into the it depends category of applying to college, right? So pretty much every college is going to be looking for capable, talented, best fit students that fill their various programs and departments, right? They want students who are going to thrive and succeed at their campuses because schools that have high 4- and 6-year graduation rates and students who stay at that college and university and are not transferring out, that retention rate, colleges want to make sure that those are high because those are going to be able to establish their credibility as viable places for students to get a great education, a great return on investment, and just make sure that the campus is operating harmoniously, right? All colleges are also working towards an enrollment target. The term enrollment management has come out and has really kind of spread in the past 10 or 20 years. So admissions is not just about selecting students, it's about managing the enrollment process and making sure that you are coming in on target to reach a certain number of students. You accept a certain number of students and you want to make sure that a certain number of students enroll and you hit that exact projected target class as much as you possibly can for the college and university that you work for, right? college vice presidents and deans of admission are let go from their jobs, or that is a part of what they are tasked to do for the college and university. So meeting that mark is something that colleges are really, really focused on as they embark on their admissions process. Colleges are also, unfortunately, right now, and there is, I think, optimistic shift in the landscape where many colleges have started to kind of pull out of rankings like the U.S. News and World Report, which, in my opinion, personally, are a very flawed metric in terms of establishing the value of what a college and university can offer to a young person. But sadly, the higher you're ranked, the more applications you have, and as colleges are going to be struggling to keep their lights on and stay enrolled in the next 10 or 20 years, it's wise from them, from a business perspective, to be able to stay as highly ranked as they possibly can, because that's going to ensure them the most applications and the most viability to stay open. So sadly, right now, with the way that we operate in terms of like, anytime you want to know something, you Google a list to be able to do it quickly for you, because there's so much information out there. And when we have someone who's kind of doing the work for you and telling you what's the best, it makes sense that a lot of students and families are going to gravitate towards rankings to make that assessment. But on the other side of the coin, right, you have the it depends category. So depending on the college or university, money is going to be a big factor that changes from school to school. There are some of those more selective colleges that have very large endowments. They have a lot of aid to be able to give to their students. They're not as concerned with how much a family or a student can afford to pay. But the majority of colleges and universities do factor that into their process, right? They're need aware when it comes to their financial aid process. So many colleges are going to be more proactive to students who can pay a higher price tag than those that cannot. So that's definitely something that can depend based on the college and university and their own resources. Yield protection, right? So this is a term that refers to how many students, when you admit them, how many of them actually enroll and deposit by May 1st at that school. So colleges will employ different tactics, right? And they have, spread like wildfire in the past 20 years. Processes like early decision, right, have really come about as a way for colleges to be more secure when it comes to their yield, being able to predict more steadily. And the pandemic and lots of other varying factors have kind of shaken this up a little bit, but still, the more students that you can, be secure are actually going to enroll at your college and university, the more you are able to reach that target enrollment number and yield as many students as you want to. So that's going to vary depending on the college, right? Some schools really have to hustle and are going to factor in things like demonstrated interest, students who interview or visit campus or do a virtual tour. Some colleges, that's going to give you a big bump in their admissions process because they want kids who are going to possibly enroll there, and they don't want to waste an admit on a kid who's going to go somewhere else. But at certain highly selective schools, the Harvards and Stanfords are like, they don't care as much if you visited or interviewed or did all these things, because they know they're great. They know that if you're admitted there, you're probably going to say yes, right? So it's going to really vary depending on the individual school. And then even certain highly selective schools still do factor in demonstrated interest, just depending on their unique culture and kind of some of the pain points, right? Like if they're in a rural area, and even if they admit very few students, they might not be in as sexy as a location as New York, LA, Seattle, Boston, Chicago. So some of those schools, because of just factors about who they are and their history or location, may have to factor in some of these components more than others. So yeah, when it comes to, asking or answering that broad question, what are colleges looking for? It's really, really so variable depending on the college and university. So yeah, hopefully that's clear here. So I think, again, kind of just talking a little bit more about highly selective schools, which is kind of the bread and butter that I'm mostly familiar with from my career. It's important to note and communicate with families that the more selective a school is, the less they're just admitting students who can do the work, who can pay the tuition, and who can, if they enroll, they're confident that they're going to have the tools to be able to graduate and stay there, right? All colleges are going to want that, but the more selective a college gets, the more that they're going to be essentially kind of like thinking about students as essentially they're building a class, or what we like to say at College SAI is that they're building a village. So, students are going to be, the foundation is their quantitative background, their grades, test scores, if that's relevant, test optional has really is and is going to continue to be really taking off in the next few years. But that's just your foot in the door at these places, these more selective schools. It's not as if the door is going to be flung open and these schools are going to admit you just because you have a perfect SAT score. Highly selective schools deny kids with perfect GPAs and SATs all the time. We actually have a slide that talks about, I think we actually took it out of this condensed version, but we do have a slide that talks about how colleges do that, right? So your grades and test scores is just the foot in the door, but it's these other qualities that students bring to the table, and especially what we like to call uncommon and common building materials that are factored into why certain students at certain highly selective schools are admitted over others. And every student kind of represents what I would call some version of common building materials and some version of uncommon building materials. And I think when college admissions, especially on the more selective ends, operates in the supply and demand mindset, institutional priorities, so directives that a college is giving down to their admissions staff from the president and the board of trustees around, we want more kids from the Midwest, or we want more kids, who are studying philosophy because we're too high on STEM majors, right? These are things that people on the admissions team are factoring into their decision. And depending on who's in their applicant pool, they are going to be considering these different common and uncommon building materials when making these decisions. So that's kind of what this slide is kind of really entailing. But here's kind of a slide that I think is just important to, share with students and families who are particularly looking for these more selective colleges, where this college essay is, a more arguably important part of their process. Strong grades and test scores are common, right? At Pomona, where I worked, we did a study that 80% of the students who applied were academically viable, purely based on their academic profile, the courses that they chose, their grades. The admit rate was not 80%, it was less than 8%, right? So you're factoring in, with all this incredibly qualified applicant pool, you are factoring in these other components that students oftentimes don't have control over, right? They don't have control over the zip code that they're bringing to the college, or the, less represented state that they may be coming from. They don't have control over their academic interests and curiosities or their skill sets, right? And at certain schools, you might be studying, for example, currently, as many of you may realize or know, right? Many students are applying and interested in, programs that are going to be seen as the biggest return of investment for them, understandably, right? So they're looking for those computer science programs. They want to be pre-med. They want to go into business fields, because those are the areas that, currently right now in 2023 are seen as areas where it is more secure, right? And it is an investment worth making. So, we also talk about how there's a lot of doing, students currently right now with our education, just the way that education is, I think students are very good at doing things and crossing things off a list. And well, not every student, but a lot of them are, right? That's something that you can start, especially in these selective applicant pools. You notice a lot of students who are good at talking about what they do, and kind of wondering like what to add into their process. But going deeper and kind of reflecting about the why behind what they're doing is something that can sometimes be a very absent. Even in these highly qualified pools where students know an agenda, they know how to complete tasks, but being task oriented isn't necessarily kind of adding a new or interesting or compelling part of the narrative for these selected places. So this is a slide that kind of gives you a sense of some of these more uncommon building materials, right? So this is something it's going to depend from school to school. But these are the types of things that I think, when students, of course, you can't just be like, oh, go major in the humanities because all these schools are looking for that. It really depends on the college. It really depends on the place. But these are just some examples of some things, especially right now at more selective colleges. These are going to probably be typically uncommon things that are in that applicant pool. So these are going to be those uncommon building materials that certain students are just going to have as part of their makeup more than others. And it's not to say that having one of these qualities or attributes guarantees you admission at any school. But in my experience, these are the types of things that are less seen in an applicant pool. So when it comes to this bigger overarching question, what are colleges looking for? This, list, I would say right here, are definitely communicating some of that piece. Yeah. Hannah, how about you?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tom. So we're going to go into how much do essays actually matter. So let's go on to the next slide. So this is from a study. Tom, I think you have to move the slides for me. Sorry, guys. I used to do it for him and now he's doing it for me. So this data is from a 2018 to 2019 pre-pandemic study that was done through NACAC. And this is before most universities went test optional, obviously, or test blind or test free. And so if you take a look at this, you'll see how much, let's say, admissions test scores were considered important and how much lower the number was for essays or writing sample. So this is before. So now considering like where we are with standardized testing, you'll be able to see that, you know, without even doing the study, this number has definitely gotten bigger. And so take a look. I just want to also note this because a lot of times I do hear from like parents or students or whatnot who, Tom, you're killing me over here. Who ask about, oh, my kid's valedictorian, how come they didn't get in? Or, oh, their interview was this or that. But if you take a look at the importance of class rank or interview and those kinds of things, it is not actually as high as people think. And so, yeah, so I just kind of wanted to show you the study relative to, I guess, where we are now. And so let's take a look at the next slide. So this is going to kind of talk a little bit more about how much do college essays matter by school. So remember, the answer is overall, it depends. And so I want to kind of show you like the difference between how selective the colleges are. So overall, the goal of the essay is to show the skills, qualities, values, and interests that a student's going to bring to that school. So what they also want to know is what are some things that we can see outside of what's already on the application, so new information, and can they write coherently in English, right? And I remember Tom was even telling me stories about how sometimes, you know, seeing lots of grammatical errors in the essay could actually make them nervous about them being students at that school. So those kinds of things are factors. So once we get into more selective, it's you know, the ability to coherently write in English, but also am I compelled by the student, right? Then we get into the highly selective. So it's not just the skills, qualities, values, interests, but the uncommon skills. Because we also want to look at, is there evidence that's going to, of the student tapping into some of the institutional priorities that they have, or certain values that are in the essay that really match their school. And again, am I compelled? Because Tom is going to talk about this in a bit, about how admissions officers have to make a case for these students. And so these details are going to be really big. And so it depends based on the selectivity of the school. So if we go into the next slide, you're going to see this slide that was actually released by Harvard. Since they're going through this Supreme Court case with affirmative action, they've become more transparent about their process. So that's where this picture is from. And so it's not, again, about just having great grades or being valedictorian. It's not even about having a sad story. It's about a lot more than that. It is a holistic process, and the essays are a part of it, but there's also a lot of other things. You know, I'm sure you've heard students say, well, I have a friend or my cousin got in with this, this, and this, but there's so many other factors that are incorporated, and a lot of the information can come from the essay. And so this is the way that I describe the college application, is that basically the application itself, if you go to the next slide, is like the numbers, the scores, the activities, even the grades, they look very, very similar from student to student. And so it's almost like it's just kind of like the bare bones of an application. So it's almost like an x-ray. If a doctor were to look at the x-ray and it's just a bunch of bones, it's not really a person, it's not a human being. So as an admissions officer, they're looking for a person, a human, a soul, right? And so yes, the activities and all of those things have to be in there, the scores and the types of classes, but ultimately the essay is what brings flesh and a soul to the application. So it's really, really important that they bring that part of themselves forward, because the admissions officer wants to admit a human being, right? Like a person that they see, like envision at the school. And so again, how much do they matter? It depends at the volume of applications they get to. I'm based in California, so with the UCs, they're read very, very, very quickly. They are important, but honestly, sometimes if like they're, as readers read them, if it starts to get predictable, they start to skim, right? So that's why we always try to make sure that our students are writing about uncommon, maybe common topics, but with uncommon connections, so it doesn't seem predictable, because you don't want the admissions officer being like, I already read this sports essay before, I already read this, like mission trip essay or whatnot. We want them to go beyond that. So that's why it does matter, because then it becomes a missed opportunity for them. And so, and again, Tom's going to touch upon this, but this was a part that actually kind of like blew my mind when I found out about it, is that admissions officers have to write a prep, that they have to say something about that student. Remember, this is the student who did XYZ, right? And so that kind of stuff to advocate for the student is really important. So that type of information is crucial. And so here's just a quick quote with the rise of test optional. They have to go very, very quickly because now there's more applications than ever before, right? But then now, without the SAT and ACT scores, the job of admitting students have become more subjective and more time consuming. And so that's going to be really important to know too. All right.
Awesome. Thanks, Hannah. And sorry about my slides. I was clicking on the back button of the screen and I was taking them forward. So anyway, so kind of as Hannah mentioned, and as we continue to keep repeating ourselves, it does depend on the school in terms of how admissions officers review files. So this slide, we feel like is really important just to share for you, even in the same state, right? Like we have, students in California, both Hannah and I are here now, who are applying to a spectrum of colleges and universities based on their goals, based on lots of different factors, right? So on the top two here, right, you see that the Cal State system, they don't even require essays for students to apply. So essay writing is one component of many at different schools, and it's going to have different weight depending on the school. With the University of California system, of course, they actually don't have an essay, like a personal statement, like you would apply through the common application. They have students have to pick and write 4 personal insight questions, which are smaller, not essays essentially, but writing samples that the UCs have asked students to complete to be able to ascertain certain skills, qualities, values, and interests that are part of their 13 points of comprehensive review, essentially, are what the UC readers are given. Essentially, those are kind of similar to institutional priorities, but they're essentially categories that UC admissions officers are asked to look for in students. And we have lots of blogs and resources and YouTube videos all about the UC PIQs, personal insight questions, that kind of reveal how the writing that students send into these schools factors into the process there. But even in the same vein of school, right? So Pomona College and Pitzer College, they both have Ps. They both share the same mascot, the sage hen, which is the rare desert bird that runs around in a circle when it gets angry. So super formidable for a mascot. But even in the same Claremont College consortium, so the Claremont colleges are these, 5 undergraduate schools. Pomona is one of them. And Pitzer is another, and they're very similar in terms of being liberal arts colleges that are strictly undergraduate, Bachelor of Arts degree students. They have a similar, course progress and just ethos, I guess. But even among these different schools, there are going to be different factors that are coming into play, right? So, Pitzer is a need-aware school where students who can afford the tuition more so are statistically highly more likely to be admitted because they are factoring that into their process, right? Not with every student, but that's just kind of goes to show how these reading processes are going to vary from school to school. And they measure demonstrated interest as well, right? So yeah, this is just kind of meant to underscore this. But we did want to kind of give you an example of what we're going to call Demeter College and kind of walk you through how one selective college reads and evaluates college applicants. So for this school, it's going to be a highly selective liberal arts college where there's an applicant pool of 11,600 students. They divide up these applications among an admission staff and a part-time reading staff of 17, with the goal of ultimately enrolling about 770 students in the end. So we're going to kind of walk through these different phases that you see here on the screen in terms of, okay, when a student applies to this selective college, Demeter, by the end of December / early January, when their admission deadline is for regular decision, what happens to their application as it moves through the different stages at that school? So, at Demeter, the admissions files that are sent into the school are going to be sorted into what's called the admissions officer's queue. Many colleges use a CRM or an application management software called Slate that houses all this information on applicants, such as how did they get into the pipeline? Was it them doing a tour at school, or did they buy their name from the College Board or CHEG or CapEx or some other name buy in terms of getting their information, typically based on test score results or things like that. That's how when students do the SAT, right? They get those floods of emails from school if they check off that box. So this is going to house a lot of information on applicants, but it's also going to be where the individual admissions officer is going to have a queue of applications that they are asked to be the expert in a certain region or geographic area. So at a lot of selective colleges, and you can Google like, who's my admissions officer, or for Washington State, or for Oregon, or for Massachusetts, New Hampshire. You can typically find this out on a different college's admission website. And that's the individual person who is going to be the main point of contact for that particular region, and reading the application with a particular lens on understanding the unique curriculum offerings, the unique culture of that particular state when it comes to education, and the variances from individual high school to high school. So at Demeter, each admissions officer, they kind of do the math out based on projections from the previous year, so that each reader and each admissions officer is kind of overseeing about 800 of that 11,600 to kind of keep it as equal as possible. And then what happens is this individual territory manager, okay, so all the kids have applied, everyone has their queue, they're going to start to enter into the reading phase. And many selective colleges have started to employ a reading technique called committee-based evaluation, also known as CBE, where they essentially split up the same file between two admissions officers, a driver and a passenger. The driver is going to be that territory manager. So just quickly, just to recap, in this reading phase at Demeter, and many selective schools will operate in a similar framework, these two admissions officers are working together to have an open conversation and dialogue, typically in about 10 to 20 minutes, depending on the student, about whether or not, based on all the different components that are included, rec letters, the transcript, the school profile that the high school is including about the unique curriculum that they offer, and what's a high GPA for that particular high school. All those things are going to be factored into the decision about whether a student has the quantitative foundation to be admissible, but then also, do they meet other important institutional priorities for the college? So are they coming from a state that's rare? Are they, if it's a college or university where they have far more male applicants, for some STEM schools, that's the reality, than female. Maybe statistically more female students are likely to be admitted because that might be an institutional priority for that school based on their supply and demand mindset. So the driver is that admissions territory manager, right? And they are kind of really steering this conversation because they're the ones who have the sense of the individual high school, and they read based on a high school group. So they're going to be reading all the kids who apply from La Jolla Country Day, right? They're going to be looking at the unique curriculum that's offered there. What's a high advanced placement or IB, International Baccalaureate load, or dual enrollment load? And I saw some questions in the chat around kind of like what's more important to colleges? Is it AP or IB or advanced? There really isn't a preference. It's based on what's available to the students in the high school. And the question that the admissions territory manager is asking themselves is not just the question, how many APs did they take? They're asking, based on this high school, what did the student leave on the table, right? And the most successful students typically in college admissions are going to be covering what we call 5 core solids. So English, math, history/social studies, science, and language. There's a lot of variance in that, and we get a lot of when we do these presentations, we get but what if they double up in this and da-da-da-da? That's the general rule of thumb for most students. If they are taking all those classes all 4 years, they're setting themselves up for the highest amount of success for the majority of colleges and universities to admit them purely based on their academic record. But they're not comparing students to other schools. It's purely based on what's available to the student within that own high school, and they're factoring in that lens when they're reading the application. They're not asking themselves, well, they should have gone and transferred to the school that has advanced placement classes because we like those better. That's not something that they're holding the students to in this process. The driver or the passenger, on the other hand, is going to be factoring in what are those more qualitative elements. So, say, for example, Hannah and I are reading the same admission file. We're reading Tom Campbell's admissions file from Cathedral High School in good old Springfield, Mass, which no longer exists because it was like kind of destroyed by a tornado and then merged with another high school. But anyway, what we would be doing is, say I'm the driver of the file, and I guess this is kind of meta because Tom's reading Tom's own file. So I'm reading the transcript that's available for Tom, and I'm looking at, okay, at Cathedral, what is the advanced curriculum here? What did Tom take? And then what are the courses that he left on the table and did not take? And based on that, do I feel like he was challenging himself enough in the light that we are impressed by his kind of commitment to his academics, right? So that's kind of the question that I'm thinking of primarily as I'm going through this. And of course, I'm also, both of us, both Hannah and myself, are also looking for evidence of institutional priorities in the file on any sides of the table. Hannah, meanwhile, as the passenger, is kind of like my celebrity guest. And what she's doing is she's telling me like, oh, I'm going through the activities list, and like, it's really impressive that they started this initiative to, send all these volunteer kits to all these elementary schools, or they, they are goat farmers or whatever it may be, right? Like, she's just going to kind of be mentioning whatever she's finding on the personal side that she's interested or thinks that it would be valuable for me to know about. And she's going to be voicing that as I'm voicing what I'm finding on the academic side primarily. So from this conversation, the admissions officer is going to be able to move the student on and either flag them with an admit, a wait list, or a deny recommendation. At this point, the denied students are kind of headed to, to quote Lion King, the elephant graveyard. And they typically are, that's the end of the process for them. They're typically not going to be seen or evaluated by other members of the team because they need to move on with the files that are looking more competitive based on academic record, which again is about 80% of the files, give or take, depending on the college. And the students that meet institutional priorities are also going to be moved forward to this next stage, which is what is called the prep stage. Not every school may be doing this, but for a lot of schools, admissions officers have to make a case, as Hannah mentioned, for a student. And being able to take information from the student's college essay is a really great way for them to do that. And basically what the admissions officer at this stage is going to do is, after they have already read through all of their files in their queue, those 800 files, they now have a smaller number of files to look through and run data on and see, okay, for my territory of Oklahoma, I'm noticing that I'm really high on private school kids, or I don't really have a lot of kids who want to study art. Depending on the college and depending on the applicant pool that year and some of the imbalances that they may be seeing in their pool, the admissions officer is going to be factoring in those types of information to basically determine they still have too many students to bring forward to the full committee conversation. Because again, the more selective a school is, you can't bring all the kids that are academically viable and meet institutional priorities. Even by doing just that, you still have too many to choose from to be comfortable sending out those yeses. So they're gonna have to make cuts just based on doing a deeper dive into the file. And, this is the time where, me, the driver, I read Tom's file from Cathedral. Hannah was the one telling me about a lot of the personal things just in our two-person conversation, the CVE review. This is when I'm kind of digging and looking myself into the essay and not just doing a quick read. I'm kind of doing a lot more of a deep dive to try and pull out quotes and qualities that I'm finding in the student that I can articulate to the rest of the team during the full committee conversation to help advocate for them. So this is an example of what a prep might look like for a student in terms of what types of points are brought into the conversation to advocate for their admission, right? And you're going to see a lot of acronyms on here because, again, admissions officers are moving very fast. So things like, for example, the admissions officer is contextualizing, why is the file here, right? They're coming from a school, they have an atypical academic interest that we don't see all the time, in the supply and demand mindset, and they're really articulating it in a really great way. Geog means geography. So, for this particular state, I don't know where it's from, this student's coming from an area that they don't get a lot of applications from. So they kind of are wanting to build a pipeline here to not have all the kids be from the urban center and the same high schools all the time. CU means curriculum. So, this admissions officer is saying, hey, this student at this high school has taken 8 APs, which is high for the high school. They're not comparing it to any other school. They're basing the academic assessment based on the high school's offerings. CREC is counselor rec. So counselor recommendation describes the student in this particular way. The admissions officer is kind of noting some of the things that they are appreciating about the student and what they're communicating and what others are advocating for the student on. TREC means teacher rec. Teacher rec is equally strong, right? CA, Common App essay. the admissions officers kind of just giving their overall impression about what this essay is communicating for the student. So this is kind of the type of information that essentially is helped to build a case and get that student to be part of that admissions class village at a selective college. And then for the sake of time, I'm just going to run quickly through this, but essentially this is once the admissions officer writes their preps for their students, they're going to present them to a larger committee at this particular sample college. And this is where the admissions officers are kind of coming together to vote on kind of some of these split decisions. And typically the admissions officers are all on the same page because they were given directives at the beginning of the reading cycle, like, hey, we want more kids for this, we want more kids for that, we needed to get the trombonist, we have to have kids who bring a certain athletic talent. But these might be some of the questions that they're asking themselves about students when they make it to this final committee stage. So, the kid might be cool and interesting, but do they actually meet priorities for the college? That happens a lot, right? There's a kid who's like, oh, they have this really cool life experience, but at the end of the day, they are another local California student who is wanting to study computer science. And we have far too many of those to admit if they're not meeting other important priorities or bringing us other things, right? It sounds kind of icky, right? It's because there's a lot of kind of an element of what students are bringing to the school. But that I think is the reality at many of these places that students don't always understand. They take things very personally, right? And they have to understand that it really isn't a personal attack or anything related to what they've communicated. It's oftentimes just supply and demand. And that is really factored into the decision process here. Shaping, I don't need to go really into that too much, but basically the TLDR version of this is that even after committee, there's usually still too many students to go out with an admit for, and they're going to do a data report to see oh, after we've gone through all these rounds, are we still high in certain areas? We're still too high in kids who are not first generation. So we want to bring in more first gen kids, or those are going to be the kind of things that come up at the end of the stage. And it's so subjective, and it so depends on all the different stages that, the college is running through. Yeah.
Awesome. Unmuting myself here. Okay, so we're going to go over the differences between English essays and college essays. And as a former English teacher, I know that a lot of teachers had different points of view on this. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Basically, this is just a kind of a table to show you something that I feel like maybe even students get incorrect with this is that they think it needs to be like this, not necessarily like a college paper, but they get really surprised actually of how casual the tone is, how it almost seems like we're more talking. And then tell me, okay, it's okay.
I'm really sorry, y'all.
It's okay. So the tone is a little bit more casual, it's not as formal. And so let's go on to the next slide, actually. So something that I found that a lot of students would make the mistake of is they would make it super descriptive, as if it's a college, not a college, a creative writing class. And so it's way too descriptive. And then, but remember that the admissions officers don't have time to pick every word apart. They're reading it very quickly. So even any kind of metaphor or symbols need to be very, very clear and fast. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to show you an example of a real draft that I got from a student. And so I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but she goes into how she met Paula during the chaos of her freshman year. And she talks about how vibrant Paula is and all this stuff. If you look at the end, the last line, it's then you find out Paula is a plant. She spent all this time trying to set up the fact that Paula is a plant. And so this kind of stuff is I think it may work in some English classes. This is, again, a first draft, but it does not, it takes way too long to get to who she is. And honestly, this metaphor doesn't work. So moving forward, so when you do work with students on their college essays, something that we really focus on is focus on the higher order concerns first. And it's kind of, as writing teachers, oftentimes we really do try to focus on the craft and those kinds of things. And I know that some teachers even feel like they're selling their souls a little bit because they're not really talking about writing. But in this aspect, the focus should not be so much on the tiny details. It needs to be the big things first. So the content, structure, and details. And I think in the future PDs, we're going to touch upon that a little bit more. Yeah, the next part, and then we'll go into, yeah, we have to go through these really fast. Oh, am I doing this? Okay. So how are they reviewed? Basically, they want to think about like, who is this person, right? So oftentimes at the end of an essay, I will ask students to tell me, what do you want me to learn about you? And then I'll repeat, like, this is what I learned about you through this essay. And so that's going to be important. They want to know, like, what is the evidence of fit there? Again, on institutional priorities. There are a lot of great questions. I really hope we can get to them today. And then why, right? So we want them to think about the why too. Like, what is the essay about? And then the feelings about the essay. So let's say if it was, this was the essay about the plant and it did not make me feel that great. So it's like, we want to kind of look at those kinds of things too. So going to the next one, next slide is, okay, so one really good way to answer some of these supplemental essays is to look at actually their mission. And so go to the next one. Next slide. Yeah, so looking at their mission statement. So we often ask the students to actually go back and look at this. And so if you look at the next slide, this one is a little bit wordy, but it gives you the difference between two students here. So the question is, describe how your academic or personal goals align with the community, culture, or curriculum of Harvey Mudd. And then it goes into like the mission statement of like, does this match? So if you look at student A, you'll see that the student is very much into the topic. They're fascinated with STEM, but it doesn't really go into the motivations and how they're observing the world around them. SAB shows a lot more about the curiosity of their world, how they feel as a human being in the world of technology. And it's just very distinct and it matches their why a lot more. So that strategy is really important too.
Yeah. So kind of going back to, I was just going to say really quickly, kind of going back to what I was saying before about how students are really good about going wide. I did this internship and I love this subject and this and that. And they kind of just put because they, in their mentality, they're used to that, right? They're used to like, I just want to add more points, get more points on the board for myself. So I'm just going to add as much to qualify how good I am about, in a certain subject. And the admissions officer will know how good you are at STEM from other evidence of the file. They're going to have your transcript. They're going to have your classes. They're going to have these other factors that they're going to be taking in. But if you look back at the mission statement for Harvey Mudd, it's to educate engineers, scientists, and mathematicians well-versed in all of these areas and in the humanities and social sciences, so they may assume a clear understanding of the impact of their work on society. So when you see here on this next slide, the first student does a great job of talking about how much they love STEM and how qualified they are for it. Sure, but most of the students are qualified, who apply to these selective colleges. The second student is really kind of going into the impact on society. They're looking at the mission statement and they're factoring this into what they're communicating to the college to be like, not only do you know that I'm a STEM aficionado based on all the other information that's there, I don't need to waste any words telling you that. You already know this. I am telling you and showing you, not just telling you, I'm showing you based on the way that I'm thinking about day-to-day interactions in my life, why it's important to think about an ethical understanding of technology and how that impacts our society. That is showing the admissions officer at Harvey Mudd that this student has all the bells and whistles and the stuff to be successful. They have that quantitative foundation, but more importantly, they have the why. They are in alignment with the college's mission, qualities, values, right? So that's something that, in working with your students, looking at mission statements and strategic plans for a college can definitely be a great way. I know some people were asking, how do you know about a college's institutional priorities? The short answer to this is that you probably will not know them. Colleges are not going to put a advertisement like, we're low in all these areas. So, please put an application that puts together how much you love late antique medieval studies, because we have very few students who are interested in that major. They're not really going to be super open about that, because that usually will mean less applications, which means if we go back to the business slide, their viability as a school going forward, as we start to have less kids applying to college, is in jeopardy, right? So unfortunately, schools are not super transparent and open about their priorities. They are not really looking to make it so easy for everyone to put together an application that looks compelling to them. They want to see students who genuinely have those attributes or qualities or skills and values. So I think looking at that mission statement is just one way to try. It doesn't mean that writing an essay like this is going to get a student into the college, because if they don't meet priorities, this is not going to be the thing that makes up for that. but they're going to be putting their best foot forward as much as possible to give fuel to the admissions officer to be able to advocate for them.
Awesome. So actually, can we move on to CEG Live?
CEG Live, yeah.
Yeah, because I actually have another meeting. But those of you who are staying after, thank you so much. And I respect your time. If you need to go, definitely you can go. And so I am going to share my screen here. And I want to tell you a little bit about CEG Live. So CEG Live is hopefully how you found out about this, but it's a wonderful program where you'll be able to actually get some summer essay workshops for your students. Ethan will be leading those. We have a bunch of different options here. And what's really awesome is you also get access to our Choose Your Own Adventure essay tool, which is a huge, huge value. And so from here, you'll learn about the montage path, narrative path, and also even like different essay examples that do not exist on our website. And then actually, Tom, if you could reshare your screen.
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to show you that we have different like flyers and things for you that you'll be able to share with your students. Can you share? Is it working?
This is virtual background. My gosh, I'm like, sorry, I'm so all over the place with my screen share today. This is like so embarrassing to me. So you want me to share the slides?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And we're going through this
Okay.
super fast.
Boom.
Okay, yes. So registration opens next Thursday, and it's really awesome because it's a pay what you can situation. And so you'll even get a flyer to distribute to your students. And there was something else that we were supposed to say about the pay what you can. Oh, it's the money goes to great places. So we have our match letters program and different things. And so honestly, I think it's a great deal because it's not the price is not per student, it's actually per school. And so there's that. And I think we'll wrap up here.
Sadly, we don't have time for the reflection question.
Yeah, we don't.
But yeah, one thing we also do want to mention as well is that part of CEG Live, one of the biggest benefits of joining it as well is the tool, the Choose Your Own Adventure tool. So that is something that I'm just going to briefly share my screen.
No, I just shared that.
If I can figure this out. Oh, you did?
I just
Okay.
shared that already. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So definitely, if you haven't registered already, really, really encourage you to take part in it. It'll be such a benefit to the students that you're working with and equip them with so many, beyond just, of course, standalone sessions and time with our team. The tool is just such a great way, with chock full of the essay examples and chock full of brainstorming exercises to walk them through these different components. And it just takes a lot of work off your plate as busy counselors and educators to be able to, especially we know many of you have caseloads where it's not going to be possible for you to work individually with every single student on adding these nuances into their essay and getting to that why as much. So we're hoping that these exercises and video guides led by Ethan and rest of the team really, really help with that. So please do, feel free to add any final questions in the chat. Jasmine will be grabbing them so that we can email them all out to you and answer as many as we can, so you have access to them going forward. But we hope you learned something new and that this information is valuable to you in your various work that you do with students. So thanks again for spending some time with us.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.